Good to go? Okay, welcome to the final review. Obviously, this is for advanced psychology, covers everything in essence. I tried to keep it to about the same proportion per chapter. So there's 21 chapters. Again, I tried to make it so that there's about 10 questions per chapter. There's a couple exceptions to this though. The last chapter, for example, where it's like psychological careers and the future of psychology, I didn't really include that many questions from that chapter. Couple. And then obviously chapter 1, where it talks about the contemporary approaches, the main theories, that's a consistent theme across all of the texts, so that's emphasized a little bit more. So in general now, I'll tell you some concepts that are emphasized on the test, and then from there I'll start asking specific questions. So obviously the contemporary approaches and applying those. That's a concept that's heavy on the test, just like it is in all the units. When you talk about therapy, therapy I think is chapter 17, disorders is chapter 16, stress is chapter 15. Handling stress and therapy and all that, your perspective, your view on how to handle that, and the psychological approach to it largely depends on what camp you fit in, which contemporary approach you agree with. So if you can understand the theories and apply those, that's probably about, 15% of the test right there. So knowing the definitions to the theories and applying them to different settings, probably about 15% of the test, okay? So let's talk about the theories then. That yellow table we filled out right away at the start of the year, it's got the 6 contemporary approaches listed on it. Give me one of them. Behavioral is one, okay? Remember we talked about the 2 focuses of psychology, mental processes and behavior. So the behavioral approach is all on the latter end, on the behavior aspect. So in the behavioral approach, what matters there is not so much what's going on in people's head. Behaviorists acknowledge that people have thinking processes, that thinking does occur, but they say that it doesn't really matter. It's sort of an illusion. What really matters is the stimulus in somebody's environment. So now let's talk about the behavioral approach a little bit and break that down. Who was the guy that discovered it? Pavlov. How did Ivan Pavlov discover the behavioral approach?
The dogs.
Okay, with the dogs and salivating, right? So he basically discovered a process known as classical conditioning, sort of by accident, where he would ring a bell as a signal to the dogs to tell them that they were going to get fed, and then he would present them with food. Ring a bell, present them with food. Ring a bell, present them with food. The whole time, he had them in harnesses, and he had tubes and instruments in their mouth which would measure how much they would salivate. And over time, he didn't even have to present the food. He would just ring the bell and they would start to salivate. So he discovered, again, a process that's known as classical conditioning. In classical conditioning, there's in essence 5 terms that you need to know. 5 terms you need to know to explain it. So what's one of the terms? And then we'll use Pavlov to explain that process. You break down classical conditioning, you want to explain it. There's 5 terms you need to know. They're similar, they just change based on when you're measuring them.
Neutral stimulus.
Neutral stimulus. So in Pavlov's example, what was the neutral stimulus?
Food, the bell.
The bell. Normally, the stimulus isn't going to do anything unless conditioning has occurred. It might do something, but it's not going to do the thing that's in response to the unconditioned stimulus. So anyways, the bell, in that instance, before conditioning occurs, is the neutral stimulus. Good. What's another term that you need to know in that process?
Conditioned stimulus.
Unconditioned stimulus. The unconditioned stimulus in this would be what?
Food.
The food is the unconditioned stimulus. You don't have to teach the dog. You hold out food, the dog's going to salivate. The dog's going to want the food. What's the unconditioned response in this example?
Salivating.
Salivating, good. So now you pair the unconditioned stimulus, which is the food, with the neutral stimulus, which is the bell. You do that enough, and then the bell becomes what? The conditioned stimulus. And then when you ring the bell, if the dog salivates, what is that?
Conditioned response.
conditioned response. So stimulus is always something that either affects somebody or could affect somebody, or an animal or whatever. Response is always the behavior. In classical conditioning, the response is always the same action, whether it's the conditioned or unconditioned stimulus, or excuse me, conditioned or unconditioned response, depends on what the stimulus is that causes it, okay? So let me give you one more example of something called a taste aversion. Remember, taste aversions are where you eat something and then you get sick, and it's not the food in and of itself that made you sick, but you just hate it now because you threw up a lot and you felt sick, whatever. In that instance, the neutral stimulus would be, let's say it's Frappuccinos. Christina's got a Frappuccino, okay? What flavor today?
Cafe espresso.
Cafe espresso, pretty good. Okay, so let's say she drinks that, gets sick right now, like leaves the study session, throws up, has to miss school, whatever. Next day she tries to have one, she's like, oh, she can't stand them anymore, all right? So that's a taste aversion. That's a specific example of a classically conditioned response. In that instance, what's the neutral stimulus?
The drink.
The drink. What's the unconditioned stimulus?
Whatever made them sick in the first place.
Whatever made you sick in the first place, the flu, whatever, okay? What's the unconditioned response?
Getting sick.
Feeling sick, throwing up, whatever, okay? Now, next week you try to drink the cafe espresso, right? You get sick again. What does the drink become?
The conditioned stimulus.
Conditioned stimulus, and then what's the sickness now in this instance?
Conditioned response.
Conditioned response. So, that section, there's like 4 or 5 questions on classical conditioning. Pavlov, it might not be the stimulus response exactly, but there's probably 4 or 5 questions on that. What's the other type of conditioning we talked about now?
Operate.
Operant conditioning. In operant conditioning, there's 4 different types. What are the 2 variables that you need to look at to determine what type it is? Let's start with that first.
Reinforcement or punishment, and then positive or negative.
Okay, so you listed the terms, yeah, that's fine, okay. So she said there's reinforcement and punishment, and then there's positive and negative. So, to determine if something is positive or negative, what do you have to do?
Or take away something.
Figure out if something is added or taken away. To determine if it's reinforcement or punishment, what do you have to do?
Is it making the behavior more likely?
Yeah, is it making the behavior more likely or less likely to occur? So remember, the biggest thing that people mix up on this probably is they think morally. In this instance, don't think morally, think like math. So, I always use a real extreme example. If Tom quits paying attention in here and I like pick up the hardest thing I could find, like this stapler, and I throw it at him, and it hits him in the head, and I'm like, pay attention, okay? What would that be?
Positive punishment.
Positive punishment, because I've added pain, and it's gonna make it less likely that he would drift off and not pay attention, okay? Most people, I'd say, is it positive that I threw a stapler at Tom? If you like Tom, if you think he's a nice guy, if you think it's morally wrong, you'd say no. But in this instance, remember, you have to think math, not morals, okay? So there's probably 4 or 5 questions about operant conditioning, a few of them where you have to identify if it's positive or negative punishment or reinforcement, and then a couple scenarios that you have to break down a little bit, okay? So that's the behavioral position in a nutshell. Give me another example of a contemporary approach of a main theory that guides psychology today.
Humanistic.
Humanistic is another one. Let me jump back a little bit and let's talk about the psychoanalytical approach first, and then I'll talk about humanistic, because that one came about as a response to the psychoanalytical and the behavioral approach, okay? So, the psychoanalytical approach was founded largely by which person? Sigmund Freud. In the psychoanalytical approach, what's the most important word to look for? What's the cue word?
Unconscious.
Unconscious or subconscious. So in the psychoanalytical approach, or the Freudian approach, you'll hear it referred to as that a lot. In that approach, the idea is that what's going on under the surface or below the iceberg, for the analogy that Freud uses, that's what really guides somebody's behavior. In the Freudian approach, what's below the surface is driven by 2 things mostly. the Thanos and the Eros, the death instinct and the pleasure instinct. So that is expressed through something in the personality that's referred to as the id. What are the two other elements of personality that Freud identified?
Ego and superego.
The ego and superego. The analogy that's often used, although it's not a perfect analogy, is the devil and the angel on the shoulder with the cartoon character trying to figure out what they should do. In that analogy, the id is the devil. What's the angel? Superego, and then the ego would be person in the middle trying to figure out how to get what the id wants, but to do it in an acceptable manner. Exactly. So, again, in the psychoanalytical approach, it's all based on the subconscious. It assumes people are basically selfish, and if they don't get what they want, at the core of their being, the id is like under the surface. If they don't get what they want, they're going to be upset, and they'll express that in a manner that doesn't worry about other people too much. So the psychoanalytical approach believes, again, people are basically selfish. They want what they want it right away. If they don't get it, they're going to express it in frustration. As a response to that approach, and as a response to the behavioral approach, and the behavioral approach, it basically says, we don't have free will, we just respond to stimulus in our environment. As a response to those two approaches, Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers came up with a theory called the humanistic approach that Amr mentioned. What's the key element of the humanistic approach? What's the core belief of the humanistic approach?
Everyone's good.
People are inherently good, and so if it came out of a response to the psychoanalytical and the behavioral approach, it's saying people are inherently good, so that's countering the psychoanalytical approach, right? How are they going to counter the behavioral approach? People have free will. So humanistic psychologists believe that self-directed or individual choices are the things that really guide people's interaction. Now that can be shaped by the environment, but ultimately people do have free will and they can choose to, through an act of will, overcome stimulus in their environment if they want to. In the humanistic perspective, probably the main theory as developed by Abraham Maslow is something called the hierarchy of needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You guys remember that? It had a pyramid, basically. And the idea is that if you don't fulfill what's at the lowest level of that pyramid, you're not going to be able to reach the top, okay? So, what's the top level called in Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Self-actualization.
Self-actualization. Good. Okay, so we talked about the psychoanalytical, behavioral, and humanistic. We've got three more approaches. What's another one?
Cognitive.
Cognitive is another one. The cognitive theory basically believes that people's thought processes, beliefs, ideas, values, all that, what's going on inside their head is what really shapes their behavior. Who's the main guy in that perspective? Jean Piaget. Piaget came up with a theory of development that had 4 steps to it. What's the first step? Sensory motor. In that step, what do?
Respond to stimuli.
Respond to stimulus in your environment. And how old are you, obviously, in that?
2.
Or younger.
Yeah.
Yep, so when you're a little kid. Good. What's the next step?
Pre-operational.
Pre-operational. And in that stage, what are you doing, Amr?
You're learning how to talk. Like, you can communicate a little bit, but not like the upper level.
Okay, you're first using symbols,
Yeah.
right? It's not just talking. So like my son now, he's a little bit over a year, he's like waving at people a little bit. He'll smile and he'll wave. So he's saying some of his first words actually. So it's not dada, it's mama, which doesn't surprise me with him. But so he's learning how to do some of those things. What's the next step in Piaget's theory of cognitive development?
Concrete operational.
Concrete operational, and what happens in that stage? You first see what?
Causation.
First see causation, and then the last stage,
Formal operation.
formal operational, and in that stage what happens?
Think abstract. critically.
Okay, you can think abstractly and critically. Good. Okay, 2 more perspectives. What's one more?
Biological.
Biological. In the biological approach, obviously, as the name implies, what matters is genetics, DNA, what's pre-programmed into you to make you act in a certain manner. Things like instincts and drives and needs, those are important in the biological approach. Okay, and then lastly, what's the last approach?
Sociocultural.
Sociocultural, and in that approach, they believe that the culture and the values that you're kind of instilled or that are instilled with you, that's what really shapes your behavior. Good. Okay, let's talk a little bit about research methods a little bit. I'm going to give you, let's do some real simple numbers to get this example, okay? 2, 3, 3, 4, 5. 2, 3, 3, 4, 5. What's the median?
3.
3. What's the mode?
3.
3. What's the mean? I gotta do math now. Whatever 17 divided by 5 is, right? Okay. 3, it'd be 3.4. So, in that instance, right, did I do the math right in my head?
I can do that.
Okay, so you guys know how to calculate that and figure it out. It's more complex than that, but there's a few questions about that on there as well. So if I do a study and I prove that 2 variables change at the same time, what does that mean? They're correlated. Does that prove that one variable causes the other one? No. Okay, good. Remember we talked about mean, median, and mode? Why don't we just use the mean all the time?
If there's an outlier, it won't be correct.
If there's an outlier, it might not be correct. Yeah. So let's say I'm trying to figure out what that average intelligence of somebody that's a 4th grader that's in my 4th grade class is. And I have one kid that's like genius, like the kind of kid that goes to college when he's a 5th grader, right? And then everybody else is like average to slightly above average intelligence. And I throw his scores in with everybody else, it's gonna make it really, really different. Let's say I wanna measure athletic ability and I have like LeBron James is a high school senior, okay? So physically that guy's a freak, right? In high school, what was he in high school? Probably like 6'6", 240 when he was a senior. Had like a 39-inch vertical. And LeBron is like a big dude too. If you look at him, like he's got some muscle mass to him. If I'm measuring athletic ability and he's in my sample, it's gonna skew it big time. So if you take the median, that can kind of help deal with that a little bit. Okay, good. Let's talk about a couple of different terms related to research methods and see if you understand those. And I'll use the coffee analogy that I've used before. Let's say I'm doing a study and I'm trying to figure out how caffeine affects reaction time. Okay? I give half of you caffeine, I give half of you a placebo, right? The half of you that gets the caffeine is referred to as what? Experimental group. The half of you that doesn't? Control group, okay? In that instance, what would the dependent and independent variables be?
Dependent would be the reaction time.
Okay, dependent would be the reaction time, and independent would be the caffeine, or not. Yeah. So dependent is the thing that you think will change, independent is the thing that you manipulate. Good. Okay, let me give you a couple of examples of bias. I want you to try to explain them or come up with examples. What's an example of sampling bias? Like, give me an example of a study that could have sampling bias.
Well, for like statistics, we did projects and we pretty much went around and asked like our friends when you should be doing random sampling instead. So
Yep.
you're not getting like a full group of our population, you're just getting your friends.
Yeah, so what did you study specifically?
We did like if dual credit classes had a higher GPA, people who were in dual credit classes had a higher GPA. So we went around in our classes too, so it didn't really help that we studied a lot of dual credit people because that was like convenient sampling.
Yep.
So we just asked people that were around us, not random.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's a good example. Convenience sampling is where you sample at your convenience. So whatever works for you, you happen to be at work, you're like, oh, I might as well sit outside and have people fill this survey out. That's not truly random. What if you worked right across the street from, like, I don't know, Mother Teresa's organization, okay? Like the office building next door is her organization. And you're trying to sample and figure out how many people drank. Is that gonna be a representative sample of the population? Probably not, probably not. What if you worked right next to Buffalo Wild Wings? Okay, so it's gonna be a little bit higher, right? So, yeah, that's an example of sampling bias. Good. How about social desirability bias? Give me an example of that. What is it, first of all? Let's define that.
Is that when people want to conform and not stand out?
Okay, it could be that they want to conform and not stand out, but not necessarily.
Is it when you're in a group of people and you ask them, most likely they're gonna say the same thing?
No, that's just conformity in general, yeah. So if you have a study and somebody changes their behavior, their responses, to fit in what they think would be desirable in society, that's a social desirability bias. So examples of that would be, if you ask people about, let's say, deviant behavior, law breaking, norm breaking, whatever, and you're asking them, have you ever done this? Do you think this? Would you do this? Did you do this? Whatever. And they think they're concerned about how that might make them look if people find out about it, they might not say yes. So an example of that, I think I joked and told you a story about two of my friends in high school, when they passed around the youth risk behavior survey, the one that asks, do you drink, do you smoke, whatever. One of my buddies is like, he leans over to his friend Dallas and he's like, tell them that we do nothing. Because if you tell them that we do all this stuff, they're gonna look at us more, and then they're gonna figure out that we drink and smoke or whatever. We don't want them to know, right? And then my buddy Dallas is like, let's just put we do everything. So it's like, do you do heroin? Yes. How many times a month? Every day, So in that instance, my buddy Aaron, the guy that's like, tell them we do nothing, that probably fits more with social desirability bias, okay? Both of those are examples of bias because they're gonna distort your results. Okay, two more terms, validity and reliability. Give me an example of either one, or define them first, and then we'll talk about examples.
Reliability.
You can do it.
Matt, go ahead.
Reliability is when you get the same results every time.
Okay, and then what's validity?
They're like,
If it tests what it says it's supposed to test.
Okay, good.
it's.
Okay, so that's kind of the main stuff. Do you wanna, so the two ideas I had for the rest of the time is, I could just take questions and answer them off the study guide, or we could do like some type of around the world quiz game kind of thing, and I could keep recording either way. It doesn't matter. What do you think?
Yeah.
You wanna do a game?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do that then. No, that doesn't work. We'll do teams then. So we'll go, you three are together. Okay, Alex, if you wanna go sit by them. And then you three in the back are together. And then one of you needs to go with those two ladies.
I will.
Okay. All right, and if you want, Megan, I'll give, I have some French vanilla cappuccino. So the winning team, I could give some of those to. Or regular coffee. Or candy or bars or something. We'll figure it out, okay? All right, so you guys, I'm gonna have you guys kind of keep score a little bit.
Come back here.
I'll try to keep score also.
Right in spot. Feel
free again to write something down if you'd like to. Hannah?
I really need to go next.
Oh, that's fine.
I might miss one or two better teams.
And you check them all. Is the review packet due?
No.
Why did we get this review packet?
It's in the, I don't
I
know.
passed it out one day and then
This is
put it
it.
in.
I don't think I was there.
I don't, that's
Was that
not
mine?
Oh.
So it's not like,
I'm like,
this isn't due, you get bonus for either watching the video and taking notes on it or being here.
yeah.
So you don't have to do anything, those of you that
Is
are.
it really 20 points?
No,
Oh.
no, it's 10. Yep, 10. Okay, ready? Well, I'm gonna go pretty quick here, okay? So, you don't have to raise your hand or anything, you just have to shout out the answer. Let's do spokespeople for the first little bit, just to make sure. So it's Tom, Bree, Carly, Hannah. For the first 5, 6 questions, you guys are the people that have to answer, okay?
And we tell them
You can tell them the answer, but if somebody else hears you tell them the answer and they say it first, then that
Does
sounds
everyone just
okay.
yell out the answer?
Just yell out the answer, but it has to come from one of those people. You ready? Here we go. Okay, remember we talked about nature and nurture? Which approach in psychology is heaviest in nature?
Biological.
Biological? Okay. Okay, so your team, it's team 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so your team 2, just a pointed question. Okay, next one. What's the term for values, like, of behavior in a group? Standards of behavior in a group.
Social norms?
Norms is correct. Good. Okay, next one. What is a social position you hold?
Whoa. Status.
Status is correct. Okay. Next one. What's the general term for a mental representation of something?
Yes.
Schema is correct.
Oh, yeah, you do.
Okay.
Yeah.
We talked about parenting styles, right? Parenting styles. High discipline, low love.
Authoritarian.
Authoritarian. Okay.
Oh.
Okay. All right. Low and low.
Uninvolved.
Doesn't tie. Nobody gets points on ties. Okay. Uninvolved is correct. Okay. When we talked about a researcher named Lorenz, he studied in part geese and how they started following people around. Sudden learning that takes place when you're really young
Imprinting.
is called imprinting. Good. Okay. Little kids think, at least our best idea of that is that, like, if they look at this little piece of paper and I hide it, they think it goes away.
Object permanence.
You gotta wait till I answer the question. And I just change it like halfway through. So object permanence is when they develop the capacity to understand that the thing is still there. Okay, new spokesperson. So just pick it, doesn't matter who. Okay, raise your hand if you're the spokesperson now. Okay, all right, ready? Parenting styles again, which one's the best?
Authoritative.
Come on,
Drew said it
flowers.
first. Right? Okay, that's you.
I didn't know the answer.
Christina got it. You gotta speak it loud and proud, okay? Okay. We talked about Harlow's rhesus monkeys, right? So, with the Harlow's rhesus monkey study, how do I word this? They found that, okay, what did they find? Oh, let's wait. I don't want you guys to answer in like 20 words. Never mind, I'll reword that later after I think of it. Okay, what's the term for lifelong learning that people go through? Where they learn the norms and values of society?
Crystallize?
No.
Oh,
Tips.
They develop who they are, they learn the norms and values of society. They get this from
Socialization.
socializations, correct? Probably good. Okay, what's the term we're on development again, what's the term for when women stop ovulating?
Menopause.
think, right? Is that true? Okay. How about when women have their first period?
Puberty?
More specific?
Menstruation.
No, more specific.
I don't know what it is.
Menarche?
Menarche. Okay, next one.
Can you tell me the answer? Can you tell me the answer?
Yes, she is.
Okay, the study of death and dying.
Thanatology.
Thanatology is correct.
You're losing us the game.
Okay, next one. Type of intelligence involving solving problems.
Fluid.
Fluid is correct.
Talk louder.
But you talk louder than you.
Did you beat him?
Yeah.
No, honors
I don't think so.
Okay.
It's hard because I have to like try to think and stuff first. but- Okay, ready?
It's okay.
Piaget's first stage.
Sensory motor. I wrote it. No, I'm just kidding.
That's correct.
Just kidding.
That's correct.
Okay. Next one. General term for a nerve cell.
Neuron.
Neuron is correct.
Yeah.
Okay. New spokesperson.
Alright.
Pick who it's gonna be. Raise your hand. Spokesperson, raise your hand.
I'll tell you the answers.
Okay. Next one. What's the term for the gap between nerve cells?
Synapse?
No.
Alex. Synapse or synapse. Good.
I was thinking for someone.
Okay.
It's like
When you get smarter, what grows?
Dendrites?
Dendrites is correct.
wow.
Okay.
Enunciate.
Okay, nervous system. This is the brain, brainstem, and spinal cord.
Central?
Central is correct.
Okay.
Okay. This part is responsible for.
Peripheral?
No, just
Nope.
stop.
No guess for them then. They're out now.
Stop.
You're out.
Okay, this part is responsible for calm, repair. This is also automatic. What is it?
Parasympathetic.
One more time.
Parasympathetic.
Parasympathetic is correct. Okay.
Where's that?
Next one. This part of the nervous system transmits information to and from the nervous system automatically.
Neurotransmitters?
Spinal cord.
No, those are the chemicals that do it. What part of the nervous system?
Endocrine system?
Hmm?
Endocrine system?
No. Yeah, you break down the nervous system.
Autonomic?
Autonomic is correct. Okay, altered states of consciousness. We talked about that before. What type relies on machines? Relies on machines to
Biofeedback?
biofeedback. Good.
Okay, they got this.
Okay. I'm gonna give you some things. I want you to tell me what they can cause. There's a thing related to altered states of consciousness that they can cause. Drugs, brain damage, fatigue. What can they cause?
Hallucinations?
Hallucinations is correct. Good. Okay. Including REM sleep, how many stages of sleep are there?
5?
5 is correct. You gotta say it a little louder though. I was like, I couldn't tell if you were like hinting or if that was really your answer.
What is it bending?
Okay. In general, at what stage in life do people get the least sleep?
Teenagers. Old.
Adolescent.
Old age is correct. Old age. Yeah, remember we looked at graph? What's the tendency in total hours slept? As you age, what happens?
It goes down.
Goes down. Yeah, I can speak, like, I got a couple little kids. I don't sleep as much as you guys. I know there's certain times where maybe some of you study a lot and stay up late. I still am staying up later than you probably. Okay? Who's that?
I don't know.
No idea.
Was it a student or?
Yeah, it's a sophomore.
Okay. All right, next one. What occurs during REM sleep?
Dream.
Dreams.
I said.
Matt said it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Back to the new spokesperson. New spokesperson, raise your hand. Okay, all right. What is the term for a nerve impulse?
Stimulus?
No, you're out now. No, you're out. Your group's out too. If I can tell that somebody guesses wrong, I'm gonna have your group be out to avoid like people saying the answer before I finish. Like
But you
Tom.
finished.
Yeah.
Wait, what'd you say?
What's the term for a nerve impulse? Either fires or it doesn't.
Oh, I know.
All or nothing.
What is it?
No, that's the rule. You're out now.
Um,
Your turn.
The
Last chance.
Last group left.
We'll get out.
I don't know.
Okay, no points. Anybody know?
No, I don't know. No? That was all or nothing.
Okay, it's called an action potential.
Oh.
Action
Yeah.
Okay.
So-
All right, we talked about sensory adaptation. Remember we did the water thing where we drank the salt? And the salt was real nasty and the sugar you couldn't taste even though it was the same amount and stuff, right? Your ability to first tell that there's salt in there, what's that
Absolute
called?
threshold.
Absolute threshold is correct. Okay? What's the term for the law that says you need greater stimulus to detect a change in stimulus?
Just noticeable difference.
No? That's the ability to tell the difference is called just noticeable difference. What's the term for the law? There's like a psychological principle that says the greater the intensity of a stimulus you have, the more stimulus you'll need to tell the difference. You guys aren't gonna remember. That's called Weber's law. Weber's law. Okay? All right. You get in a hot tub right away, it's super hot. Later it doesn't feel as hot. What's that called?
Just noticeable.
Nope.
Adaptation?
More specific.
Yeah.
You're already out.
Say it now.
Wait, are we out still?
No, you're not.
Okay.
But isn't that the
Is
one
it
you
just?
said?
That wasn't a
Said it.
spokesperson. I was just talking to Carly, actually.
Oh,
Say it.
it's too hard to keep track of that.
Carly knows.
Okay,
Sensory adaptation?
sensory adaptation is correct.
Do it now.
Oh. Okay, raise your hand again if you're the spokesperson so I can keep track.
Again? Like
Yeah,
still?
same person still.
Oh.
Okay, all right. Next one. You're in the commons and you can hear the person talking to you across from the table. You don't hear anybody else. Why can you hear them? What's that called? The ability for a stimulus to stick out from everything in the background is called what? It's another way to phrase it. Remember that. That's called figure ground perception.
Oh, yeah.
Remember we looked at the arrows, the white arrows for the guys walking up and down the stairs? Some of you saw the arrows, some of you saw the guys. Remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. So the thing that sticks out to you is the figure, stuff in the background is the ground. Okay, what are the 4 divisions in the cerebral cortex generally called?
Lobes.
Lobes is correct. Okay. All right. Okay, look at my head now. Which one is here?
Frontal lobe.
That was a tie, a lot of people. Okay, which one's here?
Occipital.
She beat you. Okay, new spokesperson, raise your hand.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. The chemicals that send messages between nerve cells.
Neurotransmitters.
I said no translate.
It was one of those two, I don't know.
He started it first.
But I finished it first.
Yeah, I'm going the person that starts it. Okay. All right.
Maybe you'll get one.
Besides the lobes, there's a way to divide the brain into chunks. Okay. There's 3 of them. Which chunk is mostly responsible for autonomic processes?
Hindbrain.
Hindbrain is correct.
That's
Quick points check. How many points do you guys have?
You want to hear the score?
Yeah.
7,
3.
14,
Three?
7, 3. Okay,
Not now.
Doing good, Jackson.
I like
We're playing golf. Roller sport.
okay. If you learn something, but you don't demonstrate learning until later, what is that called?
Learning.
Latent learning is correct. Comeback is on. Okay, if you try and fail and then decide it's not worth trying anymore, what's that called?
Learn helplessness.
Learn helplessness.
Do that, like I say.
Okay, the general term for the process of losing memory.
Deterioration?
No.
I don't know.
Okay,
Oh, I can't remember.
here's the hint. It starts with the same thing.
So, that's pretty-
Can I get half of it?
Okay.
Decay is correct.
Talk louder, Skylar. No, you didn't. You have like the quietest voice ever.
There's
Okay,
there's like a space.
um,
What is this?
If I try to learn stuff by breaking it down into parts, what's that called?
Chunky.
Chunking is correct. Okay, what's the process of holding memories called?
Storage.
Storage is correct.
Yeah, obvious.
What's the process of getting stuff into your memory?
Encoding.
Encoding is correct. What's the term for balance in a system?
Homeostasis.
That was a tough.
Talk faster, Skylar.
Okay.
Slow.
Speed, here's a couple speed rounds, okay? When we talk about needs and drives, I'm gonna give you something, you tell me if it's a need or a drive.
Oh, nice.
You ready? Water.
Need.
That was a tie, I couldn't tell. Okay, sleep.
Need.
Can anyone say it?
Still supposed to be the spokesperson.
Okay.
Just think about it.
Okay.
It's
Hunger.
Oh, that's.
Are you serious? Can you answer?
Okay, you guys got the difference in that?
50-50 question.
Okay, types of memory. Types of memory. I'm gonna give you an example. You have to tell me what it is. Okay? Riding a bike.
Long term.
More specific.
Operative.
No, you're out.
Yeah, way to go. Now he knows it. He just felt like spitting something out because I've been calling him slow.
It's procedural. Procedural is the answer. Okay? Let's see. In an instant, what you're processing, what type of memory is that?
Sensory.
Sensory is correct.
Told you it's one of those.
Okay?
It's not even an option.
Definitions of words. What type of memory would that be?
It's like that.
Okay, starts with a S.
Semantic.
Wait, what was it?
Semantic is correct.
Pretend, guys. Like 6 months.
If I give you a test 100 times, you score about the same.
Reliability.
Reliable.
Oh,
Okay.
take your phone.
I'll do better, buddy.
If you give a test to somebody to see the likelihood that they would be good in something, what type of test is that?
Aptitude.
Aptitude test is correct. Go about 5 more, maybe not even 5 more minutes, we'll see. Okay, general adaptation syndrome to stress, what's the first stage? There's 3 stages in that.
Alert.
Fight or flight?
Can you say it one more time? I don't know this one.
Both those guys are out. First stage in general adaptation syndrome. Alarm is correct.
Wow.
Fight or flight occurs during the alarm stage, but that's not what the stage is
Would an
called.
alert be the same thing?
No, they don't use the same terminology.
Oh.
They call it alarm specifically. Okay? So, when you're in the alarm stage, when you're first trying to figure out if something is stressful to you or not, what's that called?
Fight or flight. No.
Primary assessment?
Close.
Primary appraisal.
Primary appraisal is correct. Okay, all right, now, as best I can for the last couple of minutes, no spokesperson. Okay, this might be kind of hard, so let's go. Okay, positive stress.
Useless.
Use stress, Tom got that one.
Yeah.
Okay. If you are consistently thinking about something a lot, what is that?
Obsessive.
An obsession. Yep, an obsession. Okay. If you take a bunch of drugs and you need more,
Addiction.
tolerance. Okay. A behavior you repeat a lot.
Compulsion.
Compulsion's correct. Bad stress.
Distress.
I couldn't tell. Okay. What's the book that diagnoses disorders?
Yes,
Yeah.
5.
Good job, Mom.
Okay.
We all said yes at the top.
Is this
5.
Whoever said the loudest.
All right. I'm gonna give you an example of a disorder. You have to tell me what category of disorder it fits in. You ready? OCD.
Behavioral.
Anxiety.
Anxiety. Who said that? Carly?
Yeah.
Okay. DID.
Dissociative.
Dissociative.
Holy.
Good.
Disorder.
Bipolar.
Mood. Oh.
Yeah, mood. Okay. If I give you this milk and say drink this, you'll get a great test score, and you do, what's that demonstrate?
Placebo effect.
Placebo effect is correct. Okay. Let's see. If I see a monkey in the corner, what is that?
Hallucination.
Oh, I couldn't tell there. If I believe I am a monkey.
Delusion.
Delusion. The next final starts at 9:30, right?
Final round.
Or
9:45.
Okay, so let's call that good then. I went through a little bit of everything that's gonna be on the test. Use the purple sheet. If you don't have it, grab it. This is on SharePoint also. You can check it out if you need to. There's some in the room if you wanna take one. Good luck, have a good one.
Turn that off.
Yeah, turn that off. Let's see, team 2.